A $2 strip exists that can stop mold before it ever begins. Not clean it, not treat it, not chase it after it spreads through your walls. Stop it. And that should feel impossible, because mold is supposed to be inevitable. It shows up in new homes, renovated homes, carefully maintained homes. It creeps into places that look perfectly fine. The corner of a bedroom wall just above the baseboard, the edge of a window frame in a child's room, a quiet line along an attic beam where air barely moves. No stains at first, no smell, just conditions forming. Because mold doesn't need dirt. It doesn't need neglect. It only needs one thing: moisture you never see. A thin layer of condensation that forms and disappears before you even know it was there. Just enough for spores to anchor. Just enough to begin. And that's the moment this strip interrupts, not by killing mold, but by quietly removing the environment it depends on, before it can take hold. No contractor, no chemical cycles, no recurring treatments that come back every season. Just a passive piece of material, placed exactly where the problem actually starts, which raises a more uncomfortable question. Because mold remediation is a multi-billion-dollar industry, repairs, inspections, treatments, repeated again and again. So, if a $2 intervention can prevent that cycle entirely, why isn't it the standard? Not because it doesn't work, but because prevention doesn't repeat, and systems built on repetition don't naturally favor what ends the cycle. Welcome to Trust No Instinct. If you pay attention to what others overlook, you'll start seeing patterns most people miss. If this sounds new, it isn't. That's what makes it harder to ignore. Long before mold became a recurring household problem, certain environments couldn't afford to let it exist at all, not even at a microscopic level. Ancient shipbuilders understood this in a way most homeowners never had to. Greek and Roman vessels were lined with copper, not for appearance, but because wood left untreated in constant moisture didn't just rot. It became a living surface. Copper changed that. It disrupted what tried to grow on it, quietly, continuously. No maintenance cycle, no intervention once deployed. Centuries later, the same principle shows up again, but this time the stakes are higher. During World War II, field hospitals began integrating copper alloys into high-contact surfaces. Not because it was convenient, because infection, bacterial, fungal, spread fastest in damp, enclosed conditions where control was limited. They needed materials that didn't wait for treatment, materials that prevented the problem from stabilizing in the first place. No resets, no second chances. Then it appears again, less visibly. Early 20th century HVAC systems, large buildings, controlled air, controlled temperature. But one persistent issue remained: condensation forming inside cooling units, creating hidden zones where mold could anchor and spread through entire airflow systems. The solution wasn't chemical, it was structural: copper fins, strategic placement, subtle environmental disruption, not eliminating mold after the fact, but preventing the conditions that allowed it to begin. And across all of these systems, ships, hospitals, ventilation, there's a pattern that's difficult to ignore. The environments were different, the scale was different, the consequences were far more severe, but the solution stayed almost identical: simple, passive, continuous, which makes the present-day absence of that same thinking feel less like coincidence and more like something that quietly faded out, right as maintenance became a business model. So what is this actually doing? Because if something this small can interrupt a problem this persistent, the mechanism has to be precise. Mold doesn't spread randomly. It begins in microclimates, places where three conditions quietly overlap: a trace of moisture, a surface it can anchor to, and still air that allows that moisture to remain just long enough. Not visible,
Let's check this
not
window
measurable
frame.
without instruments, but enough.
Warmer here
That
on the
thin
right.
film of condensation along a window frame.
There's the hot
that
spot.
cool edge
Insulation
where warm air
issue.
slows down behind paint. That seam where airflow dies for just a few seconds too long. That's where it starts. And the strip is designed for exactly that moment. At a material level, copper and zinc don't behave passively in these environments. They release ions, microscopic charges that interfere with fungal cell membranes. Not aggressively, not instantly, but continuously, disrupting reproduction, preventing spores from stabilizing long enough to form a colony. It doesn't kill mold, it makes growth fail. At the same time, placement matters just as much as material, because these strips are positioned where condensation forms first, edges, seams, transitions between temperatures. They subtly alter the microenvironment, slight shifts in surface energy, tiny disruptions in how moisture clings, just enough to prevent that stable film from forming. And without that film, the process never locks in. No anchor point, no spread, no visible problem to fix later. Which leads to the part that almost no one talks about. Because none of this disappeared, the chemistry didn't vanish, the physics didn't change. It was repackaged. The same antimicrobial properties now show up as premium coatings, additives, specialized materials embedded into products you're told to replace, reapply, or upgrade over time. What used to be a single passive intervention became a system of repeat actions, sprays, treatments, inspections, scheduled maintenance, not because the original approach stopped working, but because permanence doesn't generate a cycle. And once a solution removes the need to come back, it quietly stops being the focus, not removed, not banned, just reframed, until what was once simple becomes something you're told requires constant attention. Once you understand the mechanism, the discomfort isn't technical anymore. It's economic, because mold isn't just something that grows. It's something that returns, and that distinction changes everything. The average mold remediation in a single home can cost anywhere from $1,500 to over $6,000. In more severe cases, behind walls, inside HVAC systems, that number climbs into 5 figures. Drywall gets cut open, flooring gets pulled, air gets tested, reports get written. You're told it's handled, and for a moment, it is. Until months later, sometimes less, it comes back. Same corner, same window line, same faint discoloration you almost didn't notice the first time. Now there's an inspection again, another quote, another treatment. Not always because someone failed, but because the condition that allowed it never fully disappeared, and that's where the pattern begins to form. A problem that comes back creates a service that repeats, becomes a system. And that system doesn't organize itself around stopping the cycle. It organizes around managing it, because recurrence creates continuity. Continuity creates revenue, prevention doesn't. A $2 solution that quietly reduces the chance of mold ever forming in the first place doesn't trigger a call, doesn't require scheduling, doesn't create urgency. It just removes the event. And when there's no event, there's nothing to respond to. No invoice, no follow-up, no reason to return. So, the center of gravity shifts toward solutions that align with repetition, treatments that need to be reapplied, services built around monitoring, products designed to expire just slowly enough to justify the next step, not because they don't work, but because they fit. And that's the part that changes how you see it, because the system doesn't need to reject simple solutions. It only needs to outgrow them, quietly, until prevention feels optional and recurrence starts to feel normal. And once that happens, the cycle doesn't just continue, it becomes expected. So, what does this actually look like in the real world? Not in theory, not in controlled environments, but in a place where mold keeps coming back. In 2019, a homeowner in a humid region of the Midwest kept noticing the same thing. Every few months, a faint dark line would reappear along the lower edge of a bedroom window. The wall looked clean. The room was ventilated. The house itself was less than 10 years old. Still, it kept returning. Inspections said the same thing each time. Surface-level mold. Clean it, treat it, monitor it. So he did, again and again, until one detail stood out. The mold wasn't spreading randomly. It was anchoring in the exact same line, where the window frame met the wall, a narrow strip where temperature shifted just enough for condensation to form and disappear before anyone noticed. So instead of treating the symptom again, he changed the condition. A thin copper-based strip placed directly along that seam. No chemicals, no sealing, no reconstruction, just placement. And over the next year, the pattern broke, not reduced, not delayed, gone, no reappearance through seasonal humidity shifts, no need for repeat treatment. The environment that allowed it to start no longer stabilized long enough for it to return. This is where the application becomes clear. These strips aren't used across entire walls. They don't replace ventilation. They don't fix structural moisture problems. They are targeted, placed where mold actually begins: window edges, bathroom seams, HVAC drip lines, transitions between warm and cold surfaces. Not everywhere, just the first point of failure. But there's something important you need to understand. I need to be honest with you. This is not a universal solution. If your home has persistent high humidity, if there's an active leak behind the wall, if airflow is fundamentally broken, this will not override that. Because once moisture becomes constant, the system is already overwhelmed. This works at the beginning, at the edge of formation, at the moment where mold is still preventable. And that distinction matters, because this isn't about eliminating mold everywhere. It's about stopping the moment, where it first becomes inevitable. And if you're wondering how accessible this actually is, it's almost uncomfortably simple. Go online, search for copper foil tape. You'll find 20-yard rolls for under $10. Cut a strip worth maybe $2. Peel the backing, place it along that exact seam where condensation forms first. That's it. No technician, no appointment window, no follow-up schedule, just a small intervention at the exact point where the cycle usually begins. And once you realize how little it takes to interrupt that cycle, it changes what necessary starts to mean. There's something unsettling about how small this is. A strip, a few dollars, placed in a place most people never look, and yet it can interrupt a cycle that quietly costs homeowners thousands, over and over again. Not by force, not by treatment, but by changing the moment where the problem begins. And that's the part that lingers. Because once you see it here, it doesn't stay here. You start to notice the same pattern in other places, where small, durable solutions exist, but never become standard. Not because they don't work, but because they don't repeat. And systems, by design, are built around what repeats. So over time, prevention feels optional, maintenance feels inevitable, and the simplest interventions fade into the background until they're almost invisible. Almost. If this changed how you see something as ordinary as mold, pause for a second, because it's probably not the only thing. And if you think more people should see this, share it. Because the more visible these patterns become, the harder they are to ignore. Like the video, if this made you rethink something you assumed was normal. Subscribe to Trust No Instinct if you want to keep uncovering what hides in plain sight. Because once you start seeing the system, you don't just fix problems differently. You start questioning why they existed that way in the first place.